Hi, my name is Kate, and I am in week 22 of long COVID. So as part of my long COVID, I am in this international research study, and they ask things like medical history and symptoms, and after sort of telling my whole story, the person who is interviewing me just said, wow, the last few months have really been a lot. How do you cope with all of this emotionally? And I think they were sort of expecting me to say something like counseling or with the help of my family and friends, both of which are very, very true. But I, like a tonal nerd, said, J. William Worden's 4 Tasks of Grief. The person interviewing me had not heard that response before. So, J. William Worden's 4 Tasks of Grief. Before I had long COVID and before I'm in the job I have now, I was a hospital chaplain. And the work of the hospital chaplain is helping people in times of great loss and challenge find meaning. And one of the big tools we use for that are Worden's 4 Tasks of Grief as a way of putting some language around what just can feel like the enormity and impossibility of loss. And as I have been walking through what is its own enormous experience and an experience of loss in long COVID, Worden's 4 Tasks of Grief have been really helpful for me, so I thought I'd share them with you. So, what are the 4 tasks? The first task is to accept the reality of the loss. And you think, okay, I have long COVID, check, reality accepted. And sure, but there is the big primary loss that is long COVID, and then there are all of the secondary losses that are connected to it. So the big loss is long COVID, but there's all sorts of losses that go along with it, like the loss of my sense of self in my working identity, the loss of my sense of self as someone whose body can do pretty much anything that I ask of it, the loss of my sense of self around being able to be fully present in my day-to-day life. All of these secondary losses are important and really important to name, because it's only in naming those losses that we can address them and move forward. And it's also worth noting that this is not a linear process. For so long in sort of studies of grief, we framed the work of grief as stages, as though we just move from one stage to another in a nice, even path. But what we know about grief from lived experience, I think, is more often than not, you'll be going along and everything will be fine, and then all of a sudden, that grief will just hit you in a way that maybe you didn't expect. So we name that, we are sort of accepting the reality of this loss, of long COVID, of chronic illness, each and every day, each and every moment as it comes up. I think it's especially important to name the reality of the loss of long COVID, because in our world right now, so many people want to ignore it. There is the sense that COVID is over and we just need to move on, however not true that might be. And for those of us who are struggling with long COVID, it is important to name our reality, because it's the reality that we face. And it's only by naming it that we can address it. Which brings us to task 2, to work through the pain of grief. Grief is uncomfortable. Grief totally sucks. No one signs up to experience grief. And grief is not just one emotion. It's not just like, oh, I feel grief. Grief is anger and rage and sadness and hopelessness, and sometimes it's wistfulness and joy and remembrance. Grief is so many things all at once. And it is worth taking time to acknowledge all of those emotions as they come up, that just as we name the grief of long COVID, we name the feelings that come along with it. Task 3, to adjust to the environment where the loss has occurred. This might sound a little strange. Worden's tasks are really based on losing a loved one, but I think they so perfectly sort of capture the experience of grieving with chronic illness, because all of a sudden you're dealing with this reality that the old you, the you were before, is gone. And your dreams for the future have changed. And now here in the present, you're in this place of one that can feel like a lot of hopelessness and loss. So a big part of the work is finding, okay, what is the new now? What is my new normal? And that can look really tangible. For me, finding my new normal is acknowledging that I have a body that works differently than it used to. It's having a shower chair in my bathroom. It's having a mobility aid when I leave the house. It's things like pacing that now I know, okay, I've got 2 activities in me a day and the rest of it has to be rest. That is the environment that myself is currently based. And I'd say it's also oftentimes this change of identity. For me, I am, as a clergy person, so used to being the person who is offering help to others. And now I'm really having to learn how to ask for help, how to ask for and receive help. And all of this is sort of this change in the environment, the ecology almost of ourselves, of who we are as people. Which brings us to task 4, which is finding an enduring connection to the old self while embarking on a new life. I will never be the person that I was before I got long COVID, even if I got better tomorrow. I will always have this experience. So the new me, the me that I want to be, has to take my present reality into account. Which isn't to say that everything is different. For me, I am someone who has always loved to dance, and Irish step dancing is one of the things that I've missed most since I've gotten sick. And part of my grieving process is finding ways that I can dance that take the present reality of my body into account. So finding an old style Irish dance tutorial on YouTube and trying to figure out how I can do it sitting down so that I don't trigger my dysautonomia symptoms. Things like, okay, so I can't focus on written text, so what do audiobooks look like for me as a bibliophile? It's finding ways to ask for help to plant my garden so that I still can have the joys of watching things grow. And it's things like this, as someone who is receiving a lot of help right now, being able to offer help to others makes me feel a little bit more like myself. So being able to share what I've learned along the way in the hopes that it can help one of you. So Worden's 4 tasks of grief are ways of sort of holding what can just be a totally overwhelming experience. Not only do we have to be sick, we now have to grieve being sick. And maybe that's not the experience that for everyone. But if for you right now, you find yourself grieving what used to be, who you used to be, the future that you imagine for yourself, I would encourage you to think about the 4 tasks. Sometimes being able to break it down, to be able to put a little language around it, be able to put 4 items on the to-do list each day, accepting the reality of the loss, working through the pain of grief, adjusting to the loss in the environment of ourselves, and finding an enduring connection to our old self while imagining what's next. What is our life going to look like now? I hope all of these can be tools that you use that help you in your own healing journey. So from my grief to yours, from my long COVID journey to yours, take good care, everybody.